Hey, Guonaxa here. Anaxa is arriving in HSR very shortly, and he's pretty interesting. His kit combines sub DPS power with main DPS potential in a really nice way, letting you use him as the Herta's best new sub DPS for those that want that, or letting him be his own powerful carry. His abilities and self buffs allow him to be pretty versatile, and I feel like he's going to be an all-around great unit with a decent ceiling. Today we'll be discovering his abilities and how to maximize them. Then we'll check out his eidolons, and then best builds and lycons, all calculated by me for you guys today. We'll then finish with teams and synergies and explain his pool value as well as why he's so potent for the Herta. Like and sub and share if this video helps you out, and let's begin. Anaxa is our very first Wind Erudition unit, which is pretty exciting. Wind preservation when? Among base stats, he has nearly the highest base attack in the game along with some decent defense, but unfortunately his HP and speed are a bit lacking. For trace priority though, you will want to focus on his skill, followed by his ultimate and then talent. Basics can be ignored. As for his abilities, let's start with his talent. Every time he hits an enemy target, he will inflict one random weakness onto them for 3 turns, whilst prioritizing weaknesses the enemies do not have. Now before you say Silverwolf found dead in a ditch etc, whilst she does need buffs, implanting a weakness is not the same as reducing the enemy's resistance to said element. Anaxa implanting a weakness is cool, but realistically is only useful to help your whole team break toughness bars. This is of course still very nice, but don't expect to be able to easily brute force high resistances because of it, and don't expect to bring him as a break support because of it. Anyways, Anaxa hits a lot with his abilities as we'll see, so you can have all weaknesses on an enemy or even multiple enemies very easily. And when an enemy reaches 5 weaknesses, Anaxa will inflict the qualitative disclosure state onto them. This will increase the damage he specifically deals, but more importantly, it will let him unleash a free additional skill after using a basic attack or skill on this target. This will do the same damage, it will regenerate energy, and it will do all that without consuming an extra skill point. This is really powerful, letting you either double the amount of skills you can use, or letting him still bring some power even when using basic attacks to regenerate skill points for the team. Remember though, to target the enemy with qualitative disclosure, there will be an icon to help you out. And so onto his skill, which is really cool. It's a bounce type attack, meaning it will hit one enemy and then hit random targets 4 times. And then you think, why is that on an Erudition unit, a path made to excel in AoE? Well, the targeting is in fact not truly random. It will actually prioritize bouncing to enemy targets that have not yet been hit during his skill, which means in a 5 target fight it will hit all enemies once. And in a single target fight you will still get those full 5 hits on that one enemy, so you get the best of both worlds with this skill. To further boost its effectiveness as an AoE bounce skill, Anaxa will also get a damage percent increase for every attackable enemy on the field when he uses it. If you're versus 5 enemies, that's a mighty 100% damage increase. This is a really cool way of giving him some strong help in single target while still allowing great AoE performance. Though to be clear, his AoE damage isn't going to be doing insane numbers. And also remember, this skill will be used for free every basic or skill versus an enemy with qualitative disclosure. That's a crazy 700% attack modifier every turn from Anaxa if skill spamming, or a free extra 350% attack modifier when only using a basic. Now, if you like weaknesses, you will also love his ult. It will inflict the sublimation state onto all enemies and deal a fair amount of damage. This sublimation state is a cheat code that skips those stacking weaknesses and just applies them all at once, but this state will only last until the start of the enemy's turn. But since he hits enemies with that ult, even when sublimation leaves, they will still retain a weakness implanted from the ult thanks to his talent, and they will also retain any previously applied weaknesses. Now, something very cool is that if the enemy does not have control res, they cannot take action whilst in the sublimation state. But the state is removed at the start of their turn, so how does that work? Well, it's therefore more of a limbo state in between actions. So what this means is if you ult and they don't have control res, enemies can't counter you or any of your abilities, useful for a bunch of annoying elite enemies. But then also, since it's removed at the start of their turn, if they have a multi-action turn like so many enemies do, you can ult just like a welt would in between those 2 actions, and it can cancel that second action. Finally, his technique will terrify enemies around him with his insane aura. When you attack an enemy that is terrified with a character, you'll attack as if they were weak to that character, and Anaxa will apply their weakness to every enemy target. This helps start up his ramping power of applying weaknesses everywhere. One important thing you should optimize with him is an Apocalyptic Shadow, and a lot of people might miss this. In MOC and Pure Fiction, this technique is just a nice boost, but in Apocalyptic Shadow, the bosses have 4 weaknesses from the get-go. What this means is you should enter combat, if you can, with an ally that is different from these 4 weaknesses. What this then lets you do is immediately inflict qualitative disclosure on them and allow Anaxa to do more damage and also get that extra skill. Normally, he'd have to wait until his second turn to do so. As for his traces, he has some pretty potent ones. For his first one, when using a basic, he will regenerate 10 extra energy. This equalizes the energy gain from his basic and skill now, meaning again he has that sub DPS and main DPS power. If he wants the skill, he gets 60 energy, but if he wants the basic, he will still get 60 energy. And speaking of energy, he will also regenerate 30 energy at the start of his turn if there are no enemies in the qualitative disclosure state. This basically means at the start of waves, when he cannot get that bonus skill, he will still get the energy's worth from the bonus skill. And his second passive is the keystone for the main DPS sub DPS split. Depending on the number of Erudition characters in his team, he will get different benefits. If he is the sole Erudition unit, he will increase his own crit damage by a massive 140%. If there is a second Erudition, he won't get that 140% crit damage, but instead will increase all allies' damage, including himself, by 50%. I like it. It's a neat way of making him intended for one role without handicapping the other role's potential by too much. Finally, Anaxa wants some damage too, regardless of the position he's played in, and he will do so with his third passive. For every one different weakness type on the enemy, Anaxa will ignore a percentage of their defense. This stacks to the 7 max types and will therefore stack to a 28% def ignore for him, which in a vacuum is nearly an 18% DPS increase. And for trace bonuses, he gets a nice boost in crit rate and wind damage, but unfortunately has HP as his third one. Before builds and more, let's check out how he scales on Eidolons. His first Eidolon will let him regen 1 skill point back after his very first skill use. It's not that insane, just nice quality of life for the first team rotation, and it helps in his hypercarry setup. It will then let him decrease the enemy's defense by 16% when using skill, amping team damage in a vacuum by 9%, which is quite underwhelming. It helps his own def ignoring benefits slightly, but there isn't enough def ignore or reduction to make it that crazy. E2, however, will let him trigger 1 instance of his talent's weakness implant when enemy targets enter the battlefield. This, alongside the technique applying a weakness, can let him have that first turn double skill up, which is nice for fast forwarding his damage. But what it also does is reduce all enemies' all-type res by 20%. It's a strong vertical investment option for both roles he can play, and versus 20% damage res enemies, it emulates reducing the enemy resistance as if they were weak to your element, fitting that weakness implant role. E2 is probably where you want to stop for most people, but this E2 is overshadowed by E1s of units like Trebi and Robin, so I think you should just stick to E0 and invest in supports if you want to go vertical. Anyways, E4 is usually whatever, but a 60% attack buff is really nice considering his large base attack and his lack of self-attack percent buffs. And E6 is the usual massive damage buff with a 1.3 times unique damage increase for Anaxa. Wow. And if that wasn't enough, he can also gain both effects of his Erudition trace. So as a main DPS, he gets 50% damage, and so does his team, and as a dual DPS, he will now get 140% crit damage. Now, here are my Eidolon gains calculated for Anaxa's personal damage. For E1 and E2 helping out a main damage dealer, you just apply his def reduction or res reduction pretty much permanently. So E1 is about a 9% increase, E2 is about a 20% increase, and all of this is in a vacuum, so it's not considering def reduction stacking or res reduction saturation. But now let's check out his builds. Because we'll be looking at a main DPS build as well as a sub DPS one, we'll first look at his light cones to avoid confusion, starting with his signature. When the wearer's turn starts, they will first regen 10 energy. Then if the enemy has a weakness implanted by the wearer, niche light cone, your damage will be increased by 60% versus that enemy. And finally, you will also reduce enemy target's defense by 12% for 2 turns when attacking an enemy. Luckily for free-to-play players, this cone is slightly underwhelming. It's great for his damage and guarantees his 2-turn ult rotation, but the overall team damage won't increase that much, and the def reduction is lackluster. The energy is comfy, but his rotation can be secured through other means like kills, quid pro quo, enemy hits, energy rope, and more. And for a hypercarry Anaxa specifically, you can skip this cone even more easily, as he will get plenty of kills and can use supports like Tingyun or Sunday for a sustain like Huohuo. He even got a free-to-play signature in patch 3.2, which is not too far behind damage-wise to his signature. It will vary depending on weaknesses implanted, but he ramps up quite quickly. And for other Lycones, you have strong options like the Hertas, which also helps a lot thanks to the skill point generation, and I kinda even prefer this cone to his sig when playing Hypercarry Anaxa because of that SP. Now, since he has a free signature Lycone, there's not much point in evaluating other cones, but here are some other ones I calculated anyways. And now on to relics and stats, starting with main DPS Anaxa. Sub DPS will come in a bit. Unlike the other anniversary unit, Anaxa is much more versatile in relic building choices. We have a bunch of options and all perform similarly, so just go with whatever's the best farm for your account and whatever pieces are best. A low speed Eagle set is very strong because he gets a 2-turn ult pretty much guaranteed. Considering a 134 speed Sunday, you only need 101 speed on Anaxa in order for an ult with Eagle to push him ahead of Sunday for that -1 speed setup, but all whilst using attack percent boots. This setup can get annoying with delays and slows and stuff, and you gotta time your ults correctly. But considering he takes a turn, double skills. Sunday advances him, he double skills, he will get his ult back up with kills or his signature, and he can therefore keep this rotation up permanently. This calc was done with Sunday Tribi as the supports, and naturally, Robin will devalue the attack percent gain from win set with attack percent boots, so keep that in mind. But for other relic options, you can also rock the Pioneer set, thanks to him always applying weaknesses, as well as Scholar Lost and Erudition, thanks to him loving skill-based damage. The Quantum set also works very well due to him easily maximizing the set's bonuses with his weakness implants, and it gets better with S1 and E1. As for his planars, you can rock Rutilant Arena and even Space Sealing Station or Glamoth if you have nice pieces. Main stats will be crit rate chest, speed boots, or attack percent if using the slow eagle setup or heavy advanced comps, and then attack percent or damage percent orb, and finally attack percent rope. For stat goals, his attack is dependent on main stats. With speed boots and damage orb, you're looking at 2.5 to 2.8k attack. With attack boots and attack orb, you can reach up to 4,000, so just get a bunch. Crit rate will want to be high, ideally 100% in combat, as he self-buffs crit damage by 140%. Not to mention, some of his best supports will give a ton too. And following that reasoning, your crit damage doesn't need to be that high. Finally, his speed should be 134 or base if using hyperspeed advances, and if using a -1 speed Sunday or Bronya, you go 135 speed or 101 speed with the Eagle set. But what about Sub DPS Anaxa with the Herta? Do I drop crit and go full send on speed and Eagle and Vonwak like some other Sub DPS do with her? I don't really like doing this on him. His kit is designed to battery her really well, whilst also outputting substantial damage. In 5 targets he won't compare to her, but as it gets to 1 to 3 targets, his damage contribution in the team skyrockets. So if you want to optimize this build, the only recommendation over main DPS relics would be to instead go for a higher speed Eagle setup, but still going for attack, crit rate, crit damage. Don't neglect his damage. For some interesting speed breakpoints, you can go for 140 speed, which with 2 ults will let him hit 4 turns in the first 2 cycles, emulating a 160 speed setup. With 151 speed, 2 ults, and a Dance 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 S5 from your Tribi friend for example, that can let you hit 3 turns in the first cycle, emulating a 200 speed setup. But you can also just stick to the other sets and opt for a 134 speed Anaxa. You won't get as many turns, but it will still work just fine for casual Herta gameplay. For optimizing planars damage-wise, you'd go Izumo, but for a more supportive role, you can go for Vonwak or Lushaka to gain some other benefits whilst also unlocking that 5% regen rate that can hit some niche rotations. Considering 2 turns for 120 energy, his ult regen for 5 energy, and 1 kill or 1 enemy hit RNG, you're usually going to be sitting at 135 energy total. Well, with 5% regeneration rate, you have enough to hit your ultimate without his signature. As for what they provide, Vonwak would allow you to start ramping up super early with weakness implants and battering the Herta and maybe even Tribi. It will also let you hit high turn amounts in the first wave. As for Lusaka, it would provide attack percent for the Herta. Great if she's insanely cracked with eidolons to boost the overall team damage more than a strong planer on Anaxa would. For main stats, you can stick with the usual crit rate, speed, attack or damage percent, but the rope can be energy if you aren't using his signature. Now, you can still go for attack percent because war, random energy RNG, a kill here and there, war armor, etc. can all provide that 2-turn ult rotation. Considering he can't hit a 1-turn ult without an energy support, energy rope won't let you hit anything new, it will just guarantee that 2-turn one. The stat goals will be similar too, as she provides a similar crit damage buff to what he would have given himself anyway. Speed wants to always be at least 134, with high breakpoints being dependent on your setup. So how good is he from testing? First, as a hypercarry, he has a quite nice ceiling, but one that isn't attainable for most players. In MOC, I'd probably rank him tier 1 to 0.5, leaning to 0.5 when there's less AoE. In Pure Fiction, despite being Erudition, his AoE capabilities are not that crazy, and he won't compare to the Herta here, so again, 1 to 0.5. However, in Apocalyptic Shadow, I would rank him tier 0, more on that in a bit. For a sub DPS for the Herta, he is easily tier 0 in MOC and Apocalyptic Shadow. He brings crazy battery potential on top of high damage. It's like if you had an Eagle passkey Serval, but with more consistent energy for the Herta, and whilst also adding big damage numbers every turn. And calculations can't necessarily compare the two properly anyway, because although he beats her substantially in calcs, in gameplay it should feel even better. And in Pure Fiction as a sub DPS for her, he works fine, but that's more of a testament to how good she is. You could say tier 0, but Jade will be better than him in this mode thanks to her insane AoE focus, so I'd say more like 0.5. But now, why do I rate him so highly in Apocalyptic Shadow? First off, his toughness reduction in single target is immense thanks to him having a bounce attack. We've seen it before with Asta and Sampo back in 1.0, and we can see it again with Anaxa, who can bounce attack twice a turn, which is insane. Secondly, he can use his technique and, with the right teammate, implant a 5th weakness right from the get-go thanks to Apocalyptic Shadow's base 4 weaknesses. This lets him double skill on his very first turn, which he can't do in MSC or PF normally at E0. But thirdly, his implants are awesome for this mode. People are overhyping it for the wrong reason, comparing it to Silverwolf, but really it's its own thing that is unique and strong. You don't get the res reduction, but you get something brand new. This game mode is about breaking, and what better than letting your whole team contribute to break? That means your sustain can now always contribute, crazy if using Gallagher or Lingsha. If you use Tribi or RMC in your team, they can also provide a substantial amount. As for the Herta, she cannot always have Jade or Serval or Argenti help with breaking, but Anaxa will always be guaranteed to provide toughness reduction as well as enabling the team to do so. And yes, there are additional enemies that make his bounces struggle, but his damage is enough to deal with them, and they'll contribute to toughness reduction anyway when they die. When the boss is broken, they're usually alone or with fewer enemies, and so then his bounce can shine again anyway. He has some really cheap, high-performing setups in Apocalyptic Shadow, and as a fun side note, he can even do 4,000 points at E0 versus specifically Hule with an unhinged Robin build. But yeah, there's my take on his power. As always, check out other takes and showcases from reputable sources if you want to form a reasonable opinion on a character. Don't just listen to only me. Now, finally, for teams and synergies. As a classic crit hype carry, the usual top picks will be Sunday, E2 plus Bronya, Remembrance MC, and Sparkle. All of these have high action advanced power, along with hype carry buffs. Sunday has some issues though, since Anaxa has a pretty much guaranteed rotation, and therefore the 40 energy from Sunday is a bit wonky unless you get a bunch of kills to help out on top or other means of external energy. Though, if you have E2 plus Bronya, she can be just as powerful thanks to the speed buff that can replicate that low speed Eagle setup, or better yet, go even higher speed if combining the speed buff with the action advance. Remembrance MC as always is OP and remains OP for Anaxa, especially since he self-buffs a ton, which leads to a lot of true damage value. And finally, Sparkle is a fine final substitute if running base speed Anaxa, but her melee buffs are quite saturated already for him. For a second support slot, you can run Tribi or Robin. Robin should have a higher ceiling, but as we know by now, she is much more annoying to use and maximize over Tribi that presses ult now and then and chills in most cases. Rame is fantastic as well, as always, and especially into Apocalyptic Shadow where he will shred toughness bars even more thanks to her break efficiency. Pella or Silverwolf when using his S1, maybe E1, Quantum Set, etc. are also nice options to help stack up that death shred even more. Silverwolf specifically can be nice to allow a first turn double skill too, thanks to her weakness in plant. And since her focus is single target as of 3.2, she works greatly with his bounce power in lower target scenarios. Tingyun is also awesome, as she can provide 60 energy on ult equal to his whole turn's generation. This can let him nearly one turn ult every time she ults, really helping his AoE damage output. And the guy really likes attack percent in general since he overbuffs damage percent like crazy and has a high base attack, so Tingyun's attack is great here for that reason. Likewise, Hanya should also be a great 4-star option for him, and you can run lower speed on him here and let her enable him to reach the 134 breakpoint. As for the Herta team, why is he so good? He will use a free skill nearly every single turn, and he can even do so on basics. So with a basic into skill alone, that's 18 energy minimum for the Herta per Anaxa turn. Versus 5 enemies, that's 24 energy. If he uses skill instead of basic versus 5 enemies, that's 30 energy per turn. And his energy generation is way less dependent on enemies compared to someone like Jade or Saval. Saval needs more enemies for that one turn ult. Jade needs more enemies unless E1 or her follow-ups. Anaxa instead brings consistency, much like Jiaoshu did for Acheron. And for ults, Anaxa 2-turn ulting is very fast too. It's not as fast as Argenti or Saval, but it's faster than Jade, and his 2 abilities per turn makes his on-turn generation better than Argenti's or Saval's anyway. He also brings some damage percent to the team. It's not much and is saturated, but it's still something. And his vertical investment options also bring more. Jade's, for example, are all selfish damage increases, but Anaxa will improve his own damage alongside team damage. Should you pull E1 Anaxa over E1 Tribi? No. But if you are investing vertically, he makes more sense over other sub DPS options. And his damage is amazing into lower target scenarios and still decent into AoE. He smashes Eagle Saval in that regard and only loses to Jade in full AoE. In 1-3 targets, he is the strongest sub DPS you can bring for the Herta, and that's where she struggles. Jade mostly helps her in the scenario she already excels in, so if you want versatility for the Herta, Anaxa brings that too. When MOC and Apocalyptic Shadow eventually stop shelling AoE 24/7, you'll notice her power drop, and Anaxa should be able to help her up more than the others. All in all, he helps Herta into lower target situations so much more than other Erudition sub DPSs. She's insane in AoE, so why help there, and instead you can help her much weaker 1-3 target damage. Though, at the same time, you could also just run Hypercarry Anaxa into 1-3 targets, or just use another team. So it's a bit weird, and you could wait for a rerun if you're worried. Either way, when considering a boss that summons ads like Flame Reaver, having her destroy AoE and him pop off in single target is really nice. If you don't have Jade, I do recommend picking up Anaxa for your sub DPS slot. Other than with the Herta, you can use him as a sub DPS with other Erudition, but his benefits are mostly for the Herta, which is a shame. I think Himiko should work nicely though, due to Anaxa enabling her to always break in any scenario now, and I think Jade is also going to be great because of how many targets he can hit. And since we haven't had a fun meme team in a while, him debuffing twice a turn and on ult could call for a fun Acheron team. Just, I don't know where you'd put him. If he was Nihility, he would be crazy cool for her. Anyways, that's all for Anaxa. If you have lots of questions, it may call for another video, but I think his team building is much less complex than Castries, who changed up sustains and has Netherwing to deal with. But I hope you enjoyed this vid, and like and sub if you did. Thanks to my amazing YouTube members, thanks for watching, and have a Guoba day.